There's a world that exists between the hours of midnight and dawn. It is a world most of you have never seen. And if you have, you are likely sleeping in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, while your parents drove through the night to reach a vacation destination before the morning traffic. But for a select few, the men and women who pilot the 80,000-pound steel behemoths that keep this country alive, the night highway is not a place of transit. It is a home. It is a battlefield. It is a cathedral. And it is a hunting ground. They call it the blacktop. And like the deep ocean, the blacktop has its own geography, its own weather, its own predators, and a set of rules that are never written down. You won't find them in the DMV handbook. You won't hear them in a safety video during orientation. These rules are passed from old hands to new rookies in the stale air of truck stop diners, whisper over cups of burnt coffee at 3 a.m, often with a warning attached. Do this, or you might not make it home. For 40 years, I lived by these rules. I ran coast to coast. I hauled frozen chicken out of Arkansas, hazardous waste out of Louisiana, and once, a shipment so secret the receiver met me at a locked gate with a gun on his hip and cash in a paper bag. I've seen the interstate at its most beautiful, a ribbon of white lines under a dome of stars, so clear you feel like you could reach out and touch heaven. And I've seen it at its most terrifying, when the fog rolls like a shroud, when the CB radio goes silent, and you realize you're the only human being for 50 miles in any direction, or so you think. Tonight, I'm going to break the silence. I'm going to tell you the secrets we keep, the unwritten rules of the night highway. Rule number 1, the night doesn't change the road. It changes the people on it. Most drivers are safe during the day. They're rushing to appointments. They're talking on the phone. They're thinking about dinner. But at night, the four-wheelers, the cars, they change. They get tired. They get desperate. They get drunk. But worst of all, they get curious. I remember my first night solo. I was 23, fresh out of school, hauling a dry van full of toilet paper out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, heading to Denver. I was green. I was scared. And I was pushing against my clock. Try and make it to a rest area before my hours ran out. It was 1:47 a.m. I was on I-80 in Iowa. Flat, dark, straight. I saw headlights in my mirror coming up fast. A little sedan. It pulled alongside my trailer and just sat there for a mile, 2 miles, staying perfectly parallel to my drive tires. I didn't know the rule yet. I flashed my lights, thinking they wanted to pass. They didn't move. They just hovered there in my blind spot. A veteran driver would have known. Never let a car pace you in the dark. Suddenly, the sedan dropped back, sped up, and cut directly in front of my bumper, slamming on its brakes. I had 80,000 pounds behind me. I hit the brakes, but in a truck, you don't stop. You attempt to slow the inevitable. The trailer began to jackknife. I was fighting the wheel, feeling the rig turn into a wild animal underneath me. The tires screamed against the asphalt. I missed that car by inches. It sped off into the night, taillights vanishing like a ghost. I pulled over, shaking so hard I couldn't hold my coffee cup. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I sat there for 20 minutes, tried to figure out why. Why would someone do that? Later, I learned the rule. There are people, kids usually, or people with nothing to lose, who play a game called brake checking the big rig. They want to see if they can make it crash. They film it. They want the reaction. They want to see the explosion in their rear view mirror. That was my baptism. From that night on, I learned to watch the shadows. I learned the second rule, the one that keeps you alive. Trust the silence of CB. If you're driving the night highway and the CB radio is dead silent, you'd better start paying attention, because silence isn't just a lack of chatter. Silence is a warning. The unwritten rules aren't just about avoiding accidents. They're about understanding that the road is alive. It breathes. It has moods. And if you don't learn to read it, it will swallow you whole. I'm going to take you deeper now, past the surface. I'm going to talk about the signs you're trained to ignore, the lot lizards that aren't what they seem, the high beams that flash in the dark that aren't a friendly warning. They're a declaration of war. And I'm going to talk about the most terrifying rule of all, the rule about the vehicles you see on the side of the road with their lights off, waiting. Because out here, in the blacktop ocean, the sharks don't wear fins. They drive beat-up pickup trucks, and they're looking for a driver who forgot the rules. Stay with me. If you've ever driven a long-distance highway at night, you've seen it. A truck coming from the opposite direction suddenly flashes its high beams at you. Most people think it's a courtesy, a warning that a cop is hiding behind an overpass. Radar gun ready. And sure, sometimes it is. That's the official story. But the unwritten rules of the night highway turn that simple act of flashing lights into a complex language, a Morse code of survival that separates the professionals from the amateurs. It's a language we never explain to outsiders, because if you have to ask what it means, you don't belong out here. There are 2 flashes, and the dreaded slow burn. Let's start with the most common. You're rolling east on I-40 through New Mexico. It's 2 a.m. The desert is pitch black. A westbound truck blinks his lights at you. Flash, flash. You blink yours back. That's the handshake. It says, I see you. The road is clear ahead. Stay safe. But then there's a single, long, sustained flash. The one that stays on for a full second before dying. That's not a courtesy. That's a warning. And if you're a rookie, you might not know what it means until it's too late. I learned this rule from a man named Big Jim. Big Jim had been hauling fuel tankers out of Texas for 34 years. He had hands like hams, a voice like gravel, and eyes that looked like they'd seen the apocalypse and decided to keep driving past it. We were at a truck stop in Tucumcari. I was complaining about a driver who had flashed me earlier. I thought he was being rude. Big Jim leaned forward, his chair groaning under his weight. He pointed a thick finger at my chest. Son, he said, if a driver flashes you once, long and hard, you don't flash back. You get your foot off the accelerator. You check your mirrors, and you pray. Why? I asked. Because a single long flash means deer. Not just one deer, a herd, or it means black ice, or it means debris, a tire in the middle of the lane, a ladder, a piece of retread that'll tear your oil pan out. It means danger is immediate, and I don't have time to talk. But the worst flash, the one that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up just thinking about it, is a no flash. That's when you see a truck coming toward you, and you can see his outline against the stars, but his lights are off, completely dark. You might think it's a malfunction, a blown fuse. But the unwritten rule says a truck running dark at 3 a.m. is either a ghost or a thief. There's a stretch of I-10 in West Texas that the old-timers call the Gauntlet. It runs through the oil fields. And at night, there are trucks, usually beat-to-hell flatbeds or old box trucks, that drive without lights. They're hauling stolen goods. Or worse, they're hauling people. I saw one once. About 4:30 a.m. A black silhouette against a moonlit sky. No lights, no running lights, no marker lights. Just a black void moving at 70 miles an hour. I flashed my brights at him. Nothing. I laid on the air horn, that deep, guttural blast that usually shakes the windows of cars a quarter mile away. He didn't react. I swerved into the left lane to give him a wide berth, and as he passed, I saw it. His driver's side door was open, not ajar, wide open, and the cab was empty. I don't know what I saw that night. I've spent 30 years trying to rationalize it. Maybe the driver had been thrown out. Maybe it was a stolen rig that had been ditched and was rolling on cruise control into the desert. Maybe, but I'll tell you what I saw in my rearview mirror. The truck veered off the road, hit a culvert, and exploded into a ball of fire that lit up the desert like sunrise. I pulled over. I ran toward the wreckage, thinking I'd find someone to save. But when I got there, the cab was crushed flat, and there was no one inside. I called it in. The police came. They searched. They found nothing. No driver. No passengers. No cargo. Just a burned-out shell. The officer asked me if I was sure I saw the door open. I said yes. He wrote in his report, driver fatigue, possible hallucination. I wasn't tired. I know what I saw, but that's the thing about the unwritten rules. They don't hold up in court. They exist only in the minds of the drivers who survived because they listened. There's another light language, too. The marker lights. When you see a truck parked on the shoulder with his marker lights on, it usually means he's taking a quick break. But if the marker lights are off and the headlights are off, but the engine is running, that's a trap. I've heard stories from drivers running the 5 through California's Central Valley, the agricultural roads that run parallel to the highway. You'll see a truck sitting in the dark, engine idling, no lights. You assume it's just a driver sleeping. But sometimes as you pass, that truck will pull out behind you, and it will follow you. Not close, just far enough back that you only see the silhouette against the city glow on the horizon. They're waiting for you to stop, for you to pull into a rest area, for you to open your door to take a leak. The rule is simple. If a dark truck follows you for more than 3 exits, you don't stop. You call in on the CB. You wake up the channel. You break the silence, because the silence is their ally. The unwritten rule is that you never let the highway go quiet. When the CB is alive with chatter, truckers gossiping, telling jokes, calling out bear in the bush for the cops, it's a community. It's a neighborhood watch stretching across state lines. But when it goes quiet, that's when the predators come out. I remember a night in the late 90s, running I-95 through Carolinas. The channel was dead. Not a peep. I'd been listening to static for 2 hours. Then, up ahead, I saw flares. Road flares, lighting up the shoulder. A truck was pulled over, hood up, a figure standing next to it, waving. Every instinct told me to stop. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Help a fellow driver? But the unwritten rule came screaming back to me. The one Big Jim taught me. If a truck breaks down on a straight stretch with no exits, and he got flares out but no reflective triangles, and he's waving with both arms over his head, keep rolling. I kept rolling. I watched in my mirror as the figure stopped waving. He just stood there. And then from the darkness of the tree line, 2 other figures emerged. They walked onto the highway. They were wearing hoods. I found out the next day on the news that 3 drivers had been held up at gunpoint on that stretch in the last month. They'd use a fake breakdown to lure drivers in. They'd knock them unconscious, steal their wallets, their cargo, sometimes a whole rig. I called the police. They said they were aware of the situation, but they didn't warn us. They didn't put out a bulletin. They didn't tell us to watch out. That's why we have the unwritten rules. Because out here, the only person looking out for you is a guy in the other lane who flashes his lights twice. The only family you have is the voice on the CB that breaks the silence to say, "There's a mattress in the left lane at mile marker 112. Watch yourselves, boys." Channel 19. If you've got a CB radio, that's where you go. It's the main artery of the trucking world. During the day, it's chaos, a cacophony of accents, jokes about dispatchers, arguments about politics, and the endless search for the best chicken fried steak in Amarillo. But at night, the channel changes. The voices thin out, the jokes fade, and what's left is a low, rhythmic murmur. It's a lifeline. The unwritten rule of the CB is simple. You check in. Even if no one answers, you check in. It's not just about traffic. It's about existence. When you're running the graveyard shift, it's easy to feel like the last man on earth. The isolation can play tricks on your mind. Hours bleed into each other. The white lines hypnotize you. You start to question reality. But when you key the mic and say, "Anybody on the side? How we looking up ahead?" And you hear that crackle of response. "Yeah, driver, it's clean to the 40. Watch your 6. There's a bear sitting at the 72 off-ramp." You're anchored. You're not alone. But sometimes the voices on the channel, they aren't real. There's a story that circulates among the old-timers. I've heard it in truck stops from Maine to Oregon. The details change, but the core is always the same. They call it the ghost of the grapevine. The grapevine is a steep, winding section of I-5 north of Los Angeles, through the Tejon Pass. It's a killer of brakes and a tester of nerves. At night, it's treacherous. The story goes that there's a driver. Some say he was a rookie. Some say he was a veteran who lost his brakes on the southbound side in the 1980s. He tried to ride it out, tried to find a runaway truck ramp, but he was going too fast. He went over the edge. The rig exploded. They never found his body, just bits of twisted metal scattered down the mountainside. But they say his voice is still on Channel 19. If you're running the grapevine alone, after 2 a.m., sometimes you'll hear a voice. It's faint, it's stat-ticky, but it's clear. It says, "Southbound, slow down. Brakes are fading. slow down. I've heard it. I'll admit it. I was running southbound, heavy, with a load of oranges out of Bakersfield. It was 3:15 a.m. I was alone on the channel. I'd been listening to nothing but static for an hour. I was tired. I was pushing it. Suddenly, the static broke. A voice came through. It was calm. Too calm. It said, "Driver, you're cooking. Slow it down. 35 through the curves." I looked at my speedometer. I was doing 52. Way too fast for a loaded rig on the Grapevine. I hit the jake brake, downshifted, and bled off speed. As I came around the next bend, there was a sharp turn with guardrail that looked like it had been replaced a dozen times. If I'd been going 52, I would have been in the trees. I keyed the mic. "Hey, thanks, driver. Appreciate the heads up. Where are you sitting?" Silence. I tried again. "Southbound. Thanks for the warning." "You still there?" Nothing. Just static. I looked in my mirrors. There was no one behind me. No headlights. No running lights. No one in front of me for miles. Some people say it's a legend, a campfire story for truckers. But I've talked to a dozen drivers who've heard that same voice on that same stretch. It's always the same. A calm warning. And when you thank them, they're gone. The unwritten rule is, when a ghost saves your life, you don't question it. You just say thank you and keep driving. But not all ghosts are benevolent. There's another voice that haunts the night channels. It's not a ghost of a dead driver. It's a living person who uses a CB to hunt. They call him the Whistler. I ran into him once on I-80 in Wyoming. The wind was howling. Snow was starting to drift across the lanes. I was looking for a place to pull over, but the rest areas were closed due to the storm. I was desperate. Then I heard it. A whistle, not a tune, just a single sharp whistle, followed by a whisper. "Eastbound. Rest area at the 180. It's open. Plowed. Pull in. Rest." I was so tired. My eyes were burning. The promise of a warm, plowed rest area was like a siren's call. But then, another voice came on. A different driver. He was whispering, too. He said, "Don't you do it. That's the Whistler. He's been doing this for 2 years. He'll tell you a rest area is open, and when you pull in, he's waiting." Last month, a driver pulled into a rest area in Nebraska on his advice. They found the truck. They never found the driver. I kept rolling. I drove another 40 miles to a truck stop that was lit up like a Christmas tree. I slept in the lot with my doors locked and a tire iron next to my seat. The next morning, I asked around about the Whistler. Some said it was an urban legend. Others said it was real. A man who lived in a camper somewhere along the I-80 corridor who got his kicks by luring exhausted drivers into ambushes. I never found out if it was true, but I never forgot the rule. If a voice on the CB is telling you where to stop, you verify it with another voice. If there's no other voice, you don't stop. The CB is a tool. It's a community, but it's also a window, and you never know who's looking in. The rest area. To a four-wheeler, it's a place to pee and maybe let the dog run for 5 minutes. To a truck driver, it's a chess match. It's a strategic calculation of risk versus reward. The Department of Transportation gives you 11 hours of driving time. After that, you have to take 10 hours off. If you're smart, you plan your 10-hour break at a truck stop, a Pilot, a Flying J, a Love's. Someplace with lights, cameras, food, and people. But the road doesn't always cooperate. Sometimes the clock runs out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes the truck stops are full, lot full, no parking spots for 100 miles. And your only option is a rest area. The unwritten rule: never sleep at a rest area unless you have no other choice. And if you have no other choice, you don't sleep. You rest with one eye open. Rest areas exist in a legal gray zone. They're public property. They're isolated. They're dark. And they're magnets for everything that goes bump in the night. I've heard the stories. Every driver has. There's the one about the driver who parked at a rest area in Mississippi. He woke up to the sound of his trailer doors being pried open. He looked out his window and saw 3 men loading his pallets into a box truck. He reached for his CB to call for help, but the microphone was gone. They'd cut the wire. He sat there in the dark, watching them steal his entire load. $50,000 worth of electronics while he was trapped in his cab, afraid to move. When they left, he went outside to find his trailer door smashed, his kingpin lock cut, and his CB antenna snapped in half. He never parked at a rest area again. Then there's the story that's darker, the one that drivers whisper about when they think the rookies aren't listening. It happened on I-10 in Florida, near the Okeechobee exit. A driver, a family man, a veteran with 20 years of safe driving awards, pulled into a rest area to take his 10-hour break. He parked in the back, away from the lights, because that's where the spots were. The next morning, a motorist found his truck idling in the spot. The driver's door was open. His wallet was on the seat. His phone was on the dash. His coffee was still warm. The driver was never seen again. The police combed the area. They found a trail of footprints leading from the driver's door into the swamp. They followed it for half a mile before it disappeared into the sawgrass. They never found a body. They never found a suspect. The case went cold. The drivers who ran that route had a theory. They said that rest area was a known spot for human traffickers. They'd look for solo drivers, especially ones who looked tired, who looked vulnerable. They'd knock on the door. They'd use a woman's voice to get them to open up. And then, the unwritten rule that emerged from that story is brutal but simple. Never open your door to rest area. If someone knocks, you don't answer. You start your engine. You leave. There's a calculus to survival on the night highway. You weigh the risk of a traffic citation for driving past your hours against the risk of a rest area. Most veterans will take the citation. A ticket won't kill you. A rest area might. But there's another option, a secret option. The truck stops that are driver-friendly, the ones that aren't on the map. These are the independent truck stops, the old-school joints that have been run by the same family for 50 years. They're usually located just off the interstate, hidden behind a hill or a row of trees. They don't have fancy restaurants or showers with marble countertops. They have a diner with a cracked linoleum floor, a parking lot that's lit up like a stadium, and a night clerk who carries a shotgun under the counter. The unwritten rule is, you find these places, you become a regular, you tip the night clerk. Because when you're running the night highway, a safe place to sleep is worth more than gold. I had a spot like that on I-70 in Kansas. It was called Millie's. It was just a gravel lot with a cinder block building. But Millie, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, kept her lot lit up so bright you could see it from a mile away. She had cameras everywhere. And she had a policy. If you parked in her lot, she knew your name, your truck number, and what time you were supposed to leave. One night, I was asleep in my bunk when I heard a knock. Not on my door, on the side of my trailer. Bang, bang, bang. I sat up. I looked out my window. There was a man standing next to my trailer. He was wearing a hoodie. He was holding a crowbar. Before I could even reach for my phone, I saw Millie. She was standing in the doorway of her diner, 20 yards away. She had a double-barrel shotgun resting on her hip. She didn't say a word. She just looked at the man. The man looked at her. He looked at the shotgun. He dropped the crowbar, raised his hands, and walked back to a beat-up sedan parked at the edge of the lot. I watched him drive away. Millie never took her eyes off him until his taillights disappeared. The next morning, I tried to thank her. She just waved her hand. "That's why you park here," she said. "Now go on. You're burning daylight." That's the brotherhood I'm talking about. It's not just the drivers. It's the people who live on the highway, the ones who understand the rules. But there's a flip side to that brotherhood. There's a darkness that exists within the trucking community itself, a corruption that festers in the shadows of the night highway. And it's the one rule that no one talks about, the one that gets you killed if you break it. Every truck driver hauls a load. That's the job. You pick up a trailer full of something, you drive it to the other side of the country, and you drop it off. Most of the time, you don't even know what's in the boxes. It comes sealed. You don't open it. You don't ask. That's the official rule. But there's an unwritten rule that runs beneath it, a current that pulls the unwary into waters far deeper than they expect. Some loads are not meant to be delivered. I was running team driving with a partner named Danny. Danny was a kid, 25, eager, a little too trusting. We were hauling out of a warehouse in Newark, New Jersey. It was a regular run. Pick up a load of auto parts, run it to a warehouse in Miami. Easy money. We picked it up at 11 p.m. The warehouse was in an industrial park that was supposed to be closed, but the gates were open. The loading dock was lit. The men working the forklifts didn't wear uniforms. They wore hoodies and masks. I should have turned around right then. That was the first sign. But Danny was new. He didn't know the signs. And I was tired. I was too tired to argue. We loaded the trailer. The man in charge, a thin man with a gold chain and dead eyes, handed me the paperwork. Auto parts, he said. Don't open it. Don't get searched. I looked at him. Is there a reason I get searched? He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Just drive. We hit the road. We made it to the Delaware Memorial Bridge before Danny's curiosity got the better of him. He went back into the trailer to check the straps. When he came back, his face was white. His hands were shaking. What's in the boxes? I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at me. I pulled off at the next exit. I went back and opened the box. It was auto parts, all right. If by auto parts you meant bricks of cocaine wrapped in plastic, stacked to the ceiling, we were hauling 500 kilos. The street value was in the millions. I called the number on the paperwork. The thin man answered. I told him we were pulling over. I told him we were calling the police. His voice was calm. You do that, he said, and I'll tell the police you knew. I'll tell them you're my partner. I've got your truck number. I've got your license. I've got your home address. He hung up. I sat in the driver's seat, looking at Danny. Danny was crying. He was 25 years old. He had a wife. He had a daughter. We had a choice. Call the cops and go to prison for a crime we didn't know we were committing, or finish the run and hope we can get caught by the real cops, or worse, by the people who were waiting for the load on the other end. We finished the run. We drove through the night, not talking, not sleeping, flinching every time we saw a police cruiser. We dropped the trailer at a warehouse in Miami that was indistinguishable from the one in Newark. Dark, anonymous, men in hoodies. The thin man was there. He handed me an envelope of cash. For your trouble, he said. I took it. I split it with Danny. We drove to a truck stop and sat in silence for an hour. Danny quit the next week. He sold his truck. He moved back home to Ohio. I heard he started a landscaping business. I didn't quit. I couldn't. The truck was my life. But I learned the rule. If a load picks up at night from a place that's supposed to be closed, from men who don't want to be seen, you don't ask what's in the boxes. You refuse the load, even if it costs you your job, because it might cost you more than that. I heard stories later. Drivers who took those loads and got caught. They're still in federal prison. Drivers who refused those loads and ended up with their trucks torched in their driveways. Drivers who took those loads and tried to cut a deal with the DA, only to be found floating in the Intracoastal Waterway. The night highway is a pipeline. It moves the goods that keep the country running. Food, medicine, furniture, cars. But it also moves the goods that keep the underworld running. Drugs, guns, people, and the drivers, we're just the mules. The unwritten rule is that you keep your eyes on the road, not on the boxes, because what you don't see can hurt you. But what you do see, that can get you killed. There's a term for drivers who take those loads willingly. They're called ghost haulers. They run at night, always at night. They use encrypted radios. They never stop at truck stops. They never talk to other drivers. They are shadows moving through shadows. I met one once, in a diner in Arizona at 2 a.m. I was the only customer. A man came in, sat at the counter 2 stools away. He was wearing a leather jacket. Even though it was 100 degrees outside, he ordered black coffee. He didn't look at me. I tried to make conversation. Where you headed? He didn't answer. Running heavy? He looked at me then. His eyes were dead. Not tired. Dead. Like he'd seen things that had burned out something inside him. He said, "You don't want to know what I'm hauling, driver. And I don't want to tell you. So let's just drink our coffee and pretend we didn't see each other." He finished his coffee, put a $5 bill on the counter, and walked out. I watched him get into a brand new Peterbilt with blacked out windows and no company logo. He pulled out of the lot without turning on his headlights until he was on the on-ramp. I never saw him again, but I think about him sometimes. I wonder if he's still out there, running the night highway, hauling a load that doesn't exist on any manifest, driven by a desperation I can't even imagine. The unwritten rule is that you leave those drivers alone. You don't ask, you don't talk, you don't remember, because out here, ignorance isn't just bliss, it's survival. I've spent a lot of time talking about the dangers of the night highway, the predators, the thieves, the ghosts, the loads that can land you in prison. But if it was all darkness, none of us would do it. We would have stayed home, gotten a job in a factory, worked a 9-to-5 like everyone else. But we didn't, because the night highway, for all its dangers, is also where the brotherhood is strongest. There's a moment just before dawn when the sky turns from black to deep purple to a thin line of orange on the horizon. That's when the drivers who have been fighting the night finally start to relax. That's when the CB channel comes alive with a different kind of voice, tired but relieved. Made it. Another one in the books. See you tomorrow night, boys. That's the sound of the brotherhood. It's the sound of people who've been through a war together, even if they never saw each other's faces. The unwritten rule is, you never leave a driver behind. I learned this rule the hard way in the Rockies. I was running I-70 westbound, heading into Colorado. A blizzard had come out of nowhere, the kind of storm that the weathermen miss, the kind that drops 2 feet of snow in an hour and turns a highway into a skating rink. I was chained up, crawling at 15 miles an hour. Behind me, I saw a set of headlights fishtailing. A driver, a rookie, probably had lost his chains. He was sliding sideways, his trailer swinging toward the guardrail. I keyed the mic. "Driver, you're in the ditch. You need help." His voice came back, high and panicked. "I'm stuck. I can't move. My trailer is hanging over the edge." I pulled over. I got out of my truck. The wind was so cold it felt like needles on my face. I walked back to his truck. He was a kid, maybe 22. He was crying. He had a load of frozen food, and he was convinced he was going to lose it. I spent 2 hours in that blizzard, helping him rechain his drives, digging his tandems out of the ice with a shovel. Another driver stopped, then another. By the time we got him moving, there were 4 trucks pulled over, for drivers covered in snow, passing a thermos of coffee around like it was holy water. We didn't know each other's names. We didn't exchange numbers. We got the kid back on the road, and we each went our separate ways. That's the brotherhood. It's not about friendship. It's about survival. It's about knowing that if you're on the side of the road with your hood up at 3 a.m., someone will stop, not because they have to, because it's the rule. But the brotherhood has its limits. There's an unwritten rule that is rarely spoken, but it's understood by every driver who's been out there long enough. You help the driver. You don't help the load. I was running through the Cajon Pass in California one night when I saw a truck on fire. Flames were coming out from under the hood. The driver was standing 50 feet away, watching it burn. I pulled over. I grabbed my fire extinguisher. But as I ran toward the truck, the driver waved me off. "Let it burn," he said. "What? Are you crazy? We can save the rig." He shook his head. He looked at the flames. "It's not my load," he said. "It's not my truck. It's a lease. The company wants the insurance money. If I put it out, I'm just delaying the inevitable." I stood there, holding the extinguisher, watching the truck burn. The driver lit a cigarette. He didn't seem upset. He seemed relieved. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. There are loads that aren't worth saving. There are trucks that are death traps. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for a fellow driver is let the fire take it. The brotherhood isn't about saving equipment. It's about saving people. And sometimes, saving a person means letting their truck go. There's a darker side to the brotherhood, too. A side that most people don't want to acknowledge. If you've been on the road long enough, you know a driver who's gone missing. Not dead, not retired, just gone. One day they're on the channel, joking with the regulars. The next day, silence. Their truck is found parked at a truck stop, No note, no forwarding address, no explanation. The unwritten rule is you don't ask. I knew a driver named Tommy. Tommy ran the I-5 corridor from Seattle to San Diego. He was a good driver, reliable, never complained. One night, I was at a truck stop in Portland. Tommy pulled in next to me. He looked different. He was pale. He was shaking. He had a suitcase in his hand, not a duffel bag, not his usual gear. A suitcase. I asked him if he was okay. He didn't answer. He just looked at his truck, a beautiful blue Kenworth that he'd spent years customizing, and said, "You want my truck? You can have it." "What are you talking about, Tommy?" "I'm done," he said. "I'm walking away." He handed me the keys. He got into a taxi that was waiting at the edge of the lot, and he was gone. I never saw Tommy again. I heard rumors later he'd gotten into something. A load he shouldn't have taken. A debt he couldn't pay. He was running from something or someone. I kept his truck for a year. I ran it up and down the coast. It was a good truck, but I never felt like it was mine. It was haunted, not by a ghost, by a memory. Eventually, I sold it to a kid from Idaho. I never told him where it came from. The brotherhood is a bond, but it's a bond forged in silence. We don't pry. We don't judge. We don't ask why a driver left his truck in a lot and walked away. We just take the keys and wish him well, because we all know that could be us. Before cell phones, there were payphones. And at night, on the highway, payphones were lifelines. But they were also conduits for things that had no business calling. The unwritten rule: if a payphone rings at a truck stop after midnight, you do not answer it. I know that sounds crazy. Why would a payphone even ring? They were outgoing only, right? Most of them. But sometimes on the old lines in the remote stops, the phones could ring. And when they did, it was never good. I was at a stop in Nevada, the middle of nowhere, the kind of place that exists only as a dot on a map. There was a diner, a gas pump, and a payphone bolted to the side of the building. It was 1 a.m. I was walking back to my truck when the phone rang. I stopped. I looked at it. It rang again. A driver walking by, an old-timer with a face like leather, grabbed my arm. "Don't," he said. "Why not?" He just shook his head. "Just don't." The phone rang 3 more times, then stopped. I asked the old-timer what that was about. He told me a story that had been passed down through drivers for decades. He said that in the 1970s, there was a driver who used to run that route, a man named Carl. Carl was a good driver. He had a wife and 2 kids back in Ohio. He was on the road for 3 weeks at a time. One night, Carl stopped at that same truck stop. The payphone rang. He answered it. It was his wife. She was crying. She said there had been an accident. Their son was in the hospital. He needed to come home right away. Carl dropped everything. He abandoned his load. He drove straight through 18 hours nonstop to get to the hospital. When he got there, the hospital had no record of his son. He went home. His wife was there. She was fine. His son was fine. There had been no accident. He called the phone company to trace the call. They said no call had been placed to that payphone from his home number or from anywhere as far as they could tell. Carl went back to the truck stop. He asked the owner if anyone had seen anyone using the phone that night. The owner said no. The phone hadn't rung all night. Carl never drove again. He said he couldn't trust the road. He said something had called him, something that knew his name, knew his wife's voice, knew his son's name, and it had lured him off the road for reasons he couldn't understand. I don't know if that story is true, but I've heard variations of it from a dozen different drivers in a dozen different states. The details change, but the core is always the same. A payphone rings at a remote stop, a driver answers, and the voice on the other end tells them something that changes their life, or ends it. The unwritten rule is, the road doesn't call. If it rings, it's not the road. There's another kind of midnight caller, one that's more recent. The cell phone call from an unknown number. I was driving through the Florida Panhandle one night, running empty, heading to a pickup in Tallahassee. My phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It rang again. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from a woman. She was crying. She said, "Please, I'm broken down on the side of the road. I have my kids with me. Please, I saw your truck number. I know you're a driver. Please stop. Please help me." My first instinct, the human instinct, was to turn around, to go find her, to help. But the unwritten rule came back. If you're a solo driver, you never stop for a stranded motorist at night. You call 911. You let the professionals handle it. I called 911. I gave them a location she'd mentioned. They said they'd send a unit. I drove on. I felt guilty. I felt like a coward. The next day, I called the highway patrol to check on the woman. They told me there was no record of a stranded motorist at that location. No calls had come in from that stretch of road that night. But they did tell me something else. There had been a series of incidents on that stretch. A woman pretending to be stranded, waving down drivers. When the drivers stopped, men would emerge from the tree lean. They'd rob them. Sometimes worse. I don't know if that was the same woman. I don't know if the call was a trap. But I know that the unwritten rules saved me from finding out. The night highway is full of stories like that. Stories that blur the line between paranoia and prudence. Stories that make you question every instinct, every act of kindness. But the rule is simple. You help from a distance. You call for help. You don't open your door. Because once you open that door, you've let the night in. If there's one thing that separates the veterans from the rookies on the night highway, it's the weather. Not the weather on the radio, not the weather on the app. The weather you can feel in your bones. The weather that tells you when to stop, even if your logbook says you have hours left. The unwritten rule. The road will tell you when it's time to park it. If you don't listen, the road will teach you a lesson you won't forget. I learned this lesson in the Sierra Nevadas. I was running I-80, heading to Sacramento. The forecast said light snow. I'd driven in light snow 100 times. No big deal. But as I climbed into mountains, the snow changed. It got heavier. The temperature dropped. The road, which had been wet, started to glaze over. I could feel the tires losing grip, the trailer starting to drift on the curves. I should have pulled over. There was a chain-up area 5 miles back. I knew it, but I was on a tight schedule. I had a delivery time. I kept going. That's when I saw the sign. Not a road sign. A sign from the old-timers. A driver coming the other way flashed his lights at me. Not twice. Not once. 3 times. Fast. 3 flashes means stop. Now, turn around if you can. I didn't turn around. I slowed down, but I kept going. A mile later, I hit black ice. The truck started to slide. I fought the wheel, trying to keep it straight. The trailer swung left. I corrected. It swung right. I corrected again. I was a passenger now. The truck was going wherever the ice wanted it to go. I ended up in a median, buried up to the axles in snow. The engine was still running. I was okay, but I was stuck. I sat there for 4 hours, waiting for a tow. The temperature dropped to 10 below. I ran the engine to keep the cab warm, watching the fuel gauge drop, calculating how long I had before I ran out. When the tow truck finally arrived, the driver, a local with a thick beard and a gruff voice, looked at me and said, "You saw the 3 flashes, didn't you?" I nodded. He shook his head. "Then why are you here?" I didn't have an answer. That tow cost me $1,200. I missed my delivery. I got a mark on my safety record. And I learned the rule. When the road tells you to stop, you stop. The load can wait. The delivery can wait. Your life can't. But fog is worse than ice. Ice is predictable. It forms when the temperature drops. Fog is a living thing. It creeps. It thickens. It blinds you. The worst fog I ever drove through was in Louisiana, on I-10, near the Atchafalaya Basin. It was the kind of fog that doesn't just reduce visibility. It erases the world. You can't see the hood of your truck. You can't see the lines on the road. You can't see anything. The unwritten rule for fog is simple. If you can't see the reflectors, you don't move. I pulled over. I put on my hazard lights. I waited. But not everyone follows that rule. That night, I heard it on the CB. A chain reaction pileup. 50 cars and trucks, just a few miles ahead of me. The fog was so thick that drivers didn't see the wreck until they were in it. I listened to CB for an hour, listening to drivers call out for help, listening to the sirens in the distance. It was chaos. It was horror. And then the channel went quiet. The unwritten rule in fog, in ice, in any weather that blurs a line between the road and the void, is this: you don't drive faster than your guardian angel can fly. There's a reason we call them suicide jockeys. The drivers who run through weather that would ground a plane. They're the ones who end up in the median or in the pileup or in the obituaries. The veterans know the weather is the only thing on the night highway that is always honest. It doesn't lie. It doesn't trick you. It shows you exactly what it is. And if you ignore it, you're not just breaking a rule. You're making a deal with something that doesn't negotiate. I remember an old driver telling me once, "Son, the road is a woman. She's beautiful. She's seductive. But she'll kill you if you disrespect her." He was talking about the weather, but he was talking about more than that. He was talking about the night itself. We've talked about predators. We've talked about ghosts. We've talked about thieves and traffickers and the weather that can kill you. But the deadliest thing on the night highway isn't any of those things. It's fatigue. The unwritten rule that every driver knows but no one talks about is this: your body is a liar. At 3 a.m., your body will tell you you're fine. You're not fine. I've fought fatigue more times than I can count. I've slapped myself in the face. I've rolled down the window in sub-zero temperatures. I've screamed at the top of my lungs. I've eaten so much gas station coffee that my hands shook. But the worst is when you lose. When the micro-sleep hits. It's called a nod. You're driving. You're fine. You're alert. And then, without warning, your eyes close. For a second, maybe two. When you open them, you're in the other lane. Or you're on the shoulder. Or you're a foot away from a guardrail. I had a nod once on I-40 in Arizona. I was running late. I was pushing my clock. I told myself I could make it to the next truck stop. It was only 60 miles. I don't remember the 60 miles. I remember leaving Flagstaff. And I remember waking up in Kingman, 60 miles down the road, with no memory of driving it. I pulled over at the first exit. I parked the truck. I went to sleep. I didn't care about my logbook. I didn't care about the load. I slept for 10 hours. When I woke up, I walked around the truck. There was a scrape on the passenger side mirror, a dent in the trailer. I had no idea how they got there. I drove to a body shop. The mechanic looked at the damage. He said it looked like I had sideswiped a guardrail. I don't remember doing it. I don't remember hitting anything. That's the terror of fatigue. You can be driving, and then you're not. Your body keeps going, but you're gone. And when you come back, you have to live with the consequences. The unwritten rule. When you feel the nod, you pull over. You don't wait for the next exit. You don't wait for the next rest area. You pull over on the shoulder, you put on your hazards, and you sleep. A ticket is cheaper than a funeral, but the companies don't tell you that. The dispatchers don't tell you that. They tell you to push through. They tell you the load is hot. They tell you the customer is waiting. The unwritten rule is that you have to be your own boss. You have to know when to say no. You have to know when to ignore the dispatcher, ignore the clock, ignore the pressure, because the night highway doesn't care about your delivery time. It doesn't care about your bonus. It only cares about whether you're awake enough to see the curve, the deer, the car with no lights. There's a reason they call it the long white line. It's hypnotic. It's a trance. The white lines flicker by, one after another, and your brain starts to shut down. The world narrows to the tunnel of your headlights. The sound of the engine becomes a lullaby. I've seen drivers lose the battle. I've seen the aftermath. A truck that went through a guardrail and down an embankment. A truck that rear-ended a car stopped for construction. A truck that crossed a median and hit another truck head-on. Those are the ones you don't talk about. Those are the ones that haunt the channel. The silence that follows a call. There's a wreck at mile marker 187. Looks bad. Say a prayer for the driver. The unwritten rule is that you say the prayer. Even if you don't believe in God, you say it, because that could have been you. And then you keep driving, because that's what we do. The night ends. It always does. The black sky turns to purple, then to orange, then to a bright Clean blue. The headlights that have been cutting through the darkness for hours become unnecessary. The CB channel, which was a whisper in the dark, becomes a roar of voices again. And the drivers who survive the night pull into truck stops, climb into their bunks, and sleep through the day. The unwritten rule, the final rule, the one that encompasses all the others, is this: you never talk about what happened on the night highway. You carry it with you. You let it shape you, but you don't speak it aloud. That's why I'm breaking the silence now, because I'm done. I've parked my truck for the last time. I've turned in my keys. I've walked away from the blacktop, but the night highway is still out there. And there are still drivers out there running the graveyard shift, fighting the fatigue, dodging the predators, listening to the CB for the voice that might save them. They know the rules. They live by them, and they never say them out loud. But I'm saying them now because someone needs to hear them. Someone who's about to get in a truck for the first time. Someone who's been out there for years and needs to be reminded. Someone who's driving home from work tonight, sees a truck in their mirror, and wonders what's going on in that cab. The unwritten rules are simple. Trust the silence, but fear it. Help the driver, not the load. When the road tells you to stop, you stop. Never open your door to the night. And always, always say thank you to the ghost that saves your life. I've been on the night highway for 40 years. I've seen things I can't explain. I've done things I'm not proud of. I've lost friends to black ice, to the fog, to the loads that were too heavy to carry. But I've also seen the sunrise over the Continental Divide. I've felt the peace of a quiet road at 4 a.m. I've been part of a brotherhood that exists outside of geography, outside of time, outside of the rules that govern the rest of the world. And I'm telling you this now, not to scare you, but to prepare you, because the night highway is waiting. It's always waiting. And if you're going to run it, you need to know the rules. There's a ritual that drivers do at the end of a long night. Before they climb into the bunk, they sit in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, and they look out at the road ahead. They don't pray. They don't think. They just sit. They're listening to the silence, listening to the road, listening to the ghosts. And when they're ready, they turn the key. The engine shuts off. The lights go dark. And the truck sleeps, waiting for the next night, waiting for the next run, waiting for the next driver who's brave enough or foolish enough to take the wheel. I'm not that driver anymore. I've hung up my keys. I've said goodbye to the blacktop. But sometimes in the middle of the night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I close my eyes, and I'm back out there, on the I-10, on the Grapevine, on the long, straight stretch through the desert where the stars are so bright they look like you could scoop them up with your hand. I'm running with the headlights off. The CB is silent. The road is empty. And I'm not tired. I'm not scared. I'm home. The night highway will always be there. It doesn't need us. It existed long before the first truck rolled down it, and it will exist long after the last one is turned to rust. It is a constant, a force, a law of nature. But for those of us who ran it, who live by its rules, who survive its dangers, it's more than a road. It's a promise that no matter how dark it gets, the sun will eventually rise, that no matter how alone you feel, there's someone on the channel who's listening, that no matter how heavy the load, you can make it to the next stop, and that sometimes in the darkest hour of the night, a voice will come out of the static, a light will flash in the distance, a hand will reach out from the darkness, and you'll know you're not alone. The unwritten rules are the only thing that kept us alive. And now they're yours. Drive safe.